Hi guys, so today's video is going to be both a non-spoiler book review and then a spoilery chat for A Heart So Fierce and Broken. This is the sequel to A Curse So Dark and Lonely. Normally when I do reviews, the non-spoiler portion, even if it's a sequel, is non-spoiler for both the one I'm talking about and the rest of the series, but that is not the case. If you haven't read the first one and you want absolutely no spoilers, I recommend checking out my book review for the first one because it's almost impossible to talk about this one without letting some things out about the events in the first. That said, the first thing that I think is very helpful to know, if you don't know this already, is this is truly Gray's book. There is Gray and there is a new perspective named Leah Mara, but if you are really excited to see Harper again, if you're really excited to see Ren again, you really don't. It took me a while to get into this second book, whereas with the first one, I was hooked right away. And this one, it felt like we were setting up for something. It definitely felt like a middle book. We were transitioning out of the first one, and that transition took a little bit. And there were certain things I wasn't loving about the second one for a lot of it. Then we get to the ending, and now I'm so excited for the third one. And so much of that has to do with spoilers, so I'm really sorry. That's not helpful at all. But with the things I can talk about that are not spoilers, Gray and Leah Mara, Gray definitely for me still felt like the same guy. Obviously, we didn't get his perspective really in the first book, and we only really saw him through Harper and Ren. But when we see him from his own head, from his own perspective, I really felt like this was the same person, and I enjoyed getting to know him better. And I enjoyed getting to see this character that it was very easy to love because you don't really see his faults. You just see him as this other character that is so loyal. And we see this thing, we only really see it as a positive, but then when you get in his head and you start to see how some of these things aren't really healthy, and they're not just not healthy for him, but they have negative consequences. So I really liked seeing that with his perspective. And with Leah Mara, I felt her perspective was very believable, and she's very gentle, very tender-hearted. And that is very difficult for her in her kingdom because she is the daughter of the queen. But she is not named heir. In their kingdom, you can name whoever you want to be heir, any of your children. It doesn't have to be the firstborn. She is the firstborn, but her sister was chosen instead. So she just feels like she is not really worth much, and that's a big part of her personality. She's actually very dedicated herself. She's actually really strong-willed, but she's also kind and compassionate, and that's not really valued where she's from. Her sister is this beautiful, perfect daughter, and she's the one that's been named heir, which definitely contributes to Leah Mara feeling kind of not so great about herself because she's constantly comparing herself to her sister, and she's constantly reminding herself, I didn't get picked to be heir because I'm not good enough. And even though I felt it was very realistic for her to feel this way given her circumstances, the downside is that in a lot of young adult stories, we see this girl who just thinks she's not very good at all, she doesn't have a lot of value, and a lot of times that perspective is changed when she meets the boy or when she has other people telling her, like, no, you are great, you are great. With her, I think it makes sense and it is done well, but I think on surface level, it looks a little bit like a cliche, like, oh, good, this girl who just doesn't think she's great, and then she's gonna meet this boy, and now she's gonna think differently because he sees the goodness in her and stuff. We've seen that before, but in this story, I do think it made sense. It was very familiar. This is obviously a personal preference, but I feel so bad. She's not even a real person. But for me, I'm like, well, I mean, I kind of liked Harper more than I like you. So I feel bad because here's this character that's like, I'm not as good as my sister. And I'm like, you're also not as good as that chick over there from the first book, which is really terrible, but she's not real, so it's fine. Without giving away any spoilers, for most of this book, I wasn't that into it, and I was really worried. I felt like we had a little bit of the lack of communication trope, and instead of it being done in a romance setting, it was done between just everybody not communicating very well. And in this case, sometimes I'm like, this is the right answer. This is what you guys should be doing. And it was aggravating for me that they weren't doing it. However, what I appreciated is throughout the story, instead of being steadfast in the, I was right to do this stupid thing, they definitely think about, was that the right decision? Should I have done that? Should I have done things differently? And I appreciated that because if you're going to make characters make decisions that are kind of dumb, I think it is good to have them realize, hey, that was dumb. So what I do want to say as a wrap up to the non-spoiler part is, if you are picking up this book and when you're first reading it, you're like, oh man, I miss Harper and Ren. I did too. And if you're reading it and you're like, oh man, I don't really like the direction this is going, I felt that way too. And then by the end, I was sold. I appreciated the story for what it was. I don't think I loved it as much as the first, but man, was that ending good. And the fact that she took a plot line in a direction that I didn't like and then still somehow got me back to being on board, I feel like that's kind of impressive. So I liked this book. It had way more ups and downs for me than the first one, which for me was just enjoyable throughout. But I have to get into spoilers now, so if you don't want to be spoiled, stop watching. But jumping into the spoilers. So I was so nervous for this sequel because I loved the first one. After how the first one ended, I really did not want this to turn into a Ren versus Grey. And I was scared that it would turn into, oh, it turns out he really is a monster and Grey is the perfect man for Harper. I just didn't want that. I didn't want these two to go after each other and Harper to have to choose between them and then between these two lands. I didn't want any of that. And it was looking like that's where we were headed when Leah Mara was introduced and when she was like, I'm gonna go try to talk peace with Ren because maybe he just needs to talk to somebody who's compassionate instead of so hard and hostile like my mom. So when she jumps into the equation, I was like, all right, I don't want this to turn into a little switcheroo where it turns out Harper gets to be with Grey and then Leah Mara's gonna be with Ren and everybody's gonna be fine. I just didn't want that. And I was so glad it feels like a really terrible thing to say, but I was so glad when her guard, Leah Mara's guard, was like, run, because he's going to use Leah Mara as leverage. And the guard's trying to protect her, and she stabs one of Ren's guards. And so they kill that guard. They kill that lady. And while that was like kind of sad, not really, but I was so glad that happened because I was like, oh, good. Okay, love is not going to happen between the two of them. I was a little annoyed with Leah Mara, though, because she's like, oh, he is a monster. He is terrible. He did this to my guard, and he's using me for leverage. I was like, okay, come on. Hold on a sec. You have read books. You read a lot of books, and it talks about how you like to talk strategy. That's one of the things you like. You're not so much about the action, but you like the preparation and the planning and the negotiating. You have to know that if you are going to put yourself in this position, that there is a chance that they're going to take you and use you for leverage. How does she not realize that? So that was kind of frustrating. I didn't really feel that attached to Leah Mara initially because I'm like, Leah Mara's a little not so bright. So I was like, whatever, Leah Mara, she can think he's a monster, but I don't want everybody else to think that. We all know what went down. And when we have her thinking, he's so awful, oh, he's terrible, how could he do this? Even though I just saw my sister order innocent people dead because it will impress mommy, I was like, how can you think that Ren's a monster after seeing what your own family members do? Anyway, so Leah Mara, she was a little like, not my favorite initially. And then Jake, though, Harper's brother, when he's like, he's probably lying to you too. He lied to his entire kingdom. So what makes you think he's not lying to you? I was like, dude, stop it. I was so nervous that this was going to like get into Harper's head. And then she was going to be like, oh, he's a monster. He is a monster. And then I was like, all right, Leah Mara can think whatever she wants. I think she's kind of dumb, but whatever. Jake's kind of dumb, whatever. But when Grey comes back and Ren's like, I need you to tell me. And it's very clear that he's got some issues right now and he needs help. And he really needs Grey to just freaking tell him it's him. And he's like, I can't tell you. He's like, well, I'm gonna get it out of you. And he's like, yeah, I know you're gonna try. And he's like, I don't want to do that. And he's like, I know, but I can't tell you. Just trust me. And all of that nonsense. I'm like, dude, just tell him. You're asking him to trust you. So, okay, here are your choices in your mind. Tell him and you think he'll kill you, or don't tell him and think he might kill you trying to get you to tell him. Just tell him and then see. That's kind of how I felt. I'm like, I know that Ren is struggling right now, but Ren also doesn't know if Lilith has control over you, and the dude was tortured for so long because of this enchantress, and then the one person that he should be able to trust, one, left, two, won't just tell him. I'm not saying that Ren should have, I don't want this to turn into like a, we all judge each other as human beings because of what happened in a fictional world. But I was like, gosh darn it, when he ended up taking, how do you pronounce his name? Is it Tycho? I don't know. But when he ends up having that kid beat too, I was like, darn it. That's pretty hard to come back from, to have this innocent person tortured to try to get something out of Gray. Because yeah, Gray is the one that knows, and Ren, you know, he doesn't know that Tycho knows. So I was like, oh, Tycho doesn't have anything to do with this. Come on, man, don't do it. At the same time, I was like, Gray, you could just stop this. So I appreciated that throughout the book, Gray was like, shoot, maybe I should have just told him. I also appreciated that Jake, of all people, was the one that was like, dude, you don't trust anybody. You didn't even trust him with this information. You thought it would be better to go through all this trouble instead of just telling him. And I was like, thank you. Finally, somebody said it. It's even like one of the dumbest people in this book. To be perfectly honest, for a lot of the book, this was what I was afraid was going to happen, where they were going to be pitted against each other. I was not loving this, let's turn these two characters against each other thing. And I was like, okay, the only way this is going to work is if somehow, in the end, we can all realize we're going to work for the greater good and we're going to get past our differences somehow. I don't mind if there's some difficulties along the way, but somehow we need to get past this. And in my head, when I finished the first one, I was like, here's what I think is going to go down. I think these two are going to have some trouble. We're going to have to get through their frustrations and their difficulties with one another. But pretty sure Lilith is still alive. And I bet she's going to come back, and then she's going to be the antagonist in the third one. And I was right, but it still surprised me. I don't know what it was. I knew that she was still alive, but darn it, that last chunk when Gray is like, everything's all hunky-dory and things are turning around. And I'm like, wow, okay, maybe things will get patched up. Maybe things will work out. And he sees Ren, and Ren is like shaking and he's trembling. And I'm like, oh, shoot. Oh my gosh, Lilith's back. And then when he's like saying, he's like, you're not the only one with a spy. And I was like, oh my gosh, Lilith's back. And then when she's there and like with her scar on her throat, man, I don't know why. I knew it was coming, but it still got me all pumped for the next one. I haven't really talked too much about Gray and Liamara's romance, but I did think it was very sweet. I liked their romance, and it had that hint of forbidden romance and everything. I did not call that she was going to be the one to kill her mom. I thought Gray would do it, or I thought he was going to kill her. I legitimately was like, oh my gosh, is he going to have to kill her right now? I didn't think that he would do it, but I didn't know what was going to happen. And when she killed her mom, I was like, oh, that's the perfect solution. She was a very sweet character. She was very passionate, and she was very selfless. And I did like her, but I just didn't love her initially. All of her nonsense about how Ren was so awful for doing what made sense in a political, like, we're playing politics here. Your mom is ruthless. You've seen what she's been doing. Ren's not the worst. Anyway, so I was annoyed with her initially, and then by the end, I liked her by the end. And I feel like I just want them to run off and not have to worry about everything. For some reason, Harper and Ren, I just want them to be like, hey guys, here's what's up. You're gonna do what I say because I am the king and queen. I just want them to be these like amazing rulers. But Gray and Liamara, I just want them to go get a cottage somewhere, have a cozy fire, she can read her books, and he can practice throwing his knives and stuff. I just want them to find happiness in some cute, simple little life. Overall, for a lot of this book, was frustrated. I did appreciate that Gray had to come to terms with the fact that these are the consequences of him making the decision that he made. I think it was showing that there was fault on so many people's sides. In the end, with hindsight, I ended up really liking how things transpired, because this book to me was about making mistakes and how to deal with those mistakes. Definitely let me know your thoughts on this book. I can completely see why some people wouldn't end up loving it by the end, but I can also see, especially if you're a fan of Gray, why you would think this was fantastic. But regardless, let me know your thoughts. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.